Hi, everyone. Welcome to, oh my goodness,
Right off the bat.
right off the bat. Hi, welcome back to the Nuance Needed podcast. I'm Amanda.
And this is Sam.
And we're so excited today because we have the one and only Kimberly Quinlan here.
Thank you for having me. Yay.
Yeah. For those that don't, I mean, you are like the original, I feel like, OCD internet, Instagram expert. I feel like at least that's I joined Instagram and you were already like the OCD queen of Instagram. I feel like in 2017, 2018, you were probably on there before then.
Yep. Yeah. Around that time. Yeah. So that's nice. I love being a queen. That sounds fun. I'll take it.
So yeah, we're here to talk to you all about OCD and anxiety. But if people don't know your background, can you dive in a little bit to like what you do, your podcast, and, you know, your specialties?
Yeah, so I have a private practice in Calabasas, California, Los Angeles. We specialize in OCD and OCD-related conditions. I also have a whole separate passion project, which is CBT School. That's where I have courses for people who cannot access, specialized care for OCD and OCD-related conditions. So I work part-time in both. I have a podcast called Your Anxiety Toolkit, which is, again, just a free platform where I talk about the stuff that shows up in therapy with my clients, a lot of mindfulness, a ton of self-compassion. It's just a bit of fun and silliness, but hopefully really helpful. Really you could take it and put it to practice right away.
Amazing. Well, let's get right into it. And I think where I kind of think would be cool to start is I feel like in the past couple of years, OCD has been talked about more, and there has been a lot of really great advocacy of people just understanding OCD better. How would you say things have sort of changed in the past few years? Have things gotten better? But with TikTok, have things also gotten worse? What are your thoughts about it?
It's such a great question. And I'm actually really feeling hopeful about our community in this era. And I'll tell you, and this is my my personal subjective experience, but back when I joined Instagram, for example, most people thought, not that I was the one who changed this either, by the way, but back in that era, people thought of OCD as hand washing and crack jumping and stove checking.
Yeah, very physical manifestations.
Yeah, maybe some perfectionism, maybe some symmetry obsessions, things they'd seen on what I call Hollywood OCD, right? Like they'd seen a lot of this, and that's great. I mean, that is a part of having OCD, but the real progress I have seen has been that we now have a better understanding of this community and society of more of the taboo topics, the nature of that OCD is often a very mental compulsion, that it mightn't be physical. One of the biggest compulsions people with OCD do is mental compulsions, right? So I think we've got a much better understanding of the different subtypes, even again, like more of these like forbidden, you can't tell anybody, secret types are becoming more normalized. I feel really grateful. Like I feel like on TikTok, Instagram, some of conditions have been used as more of like a pop culture, like, and we still do that. There's still the whole like, oh, I'm so OCD and getting it wrong and, so forth. But I'm also really hopeful. Like I feel like the community has really come together and will actually go to fight, right? Go to bat for when they're seeing it not represented well.
That's so one positive thing. I feel like I don't hear a lot of positive stories on the internet these days.
About anything.
Yeah. I mean, I could easily give you a whole episode of like the terrible things that we see. And yeah, there are, but I feel we're moving in the right direction in these particular conditions, right? And that may change, but for right now, I'll take it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the cultural moments that stands out to me where I feel like it was the first time I remember seeing it broadcast like very directly, and you guys are going to laugh at the example that I'm about to give, but Khloe Kardashian.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that.
Talking about how organizing her pantry was OCD.
Yeah.
And I was
like,
a
lot of backlash about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like that was the first time I saw it on like an industrial scale, if you will, of like exposure and conversation.
Right. And what was interesting is the following year in OCD Awareness Week, a lot of the folks, the advocates, did what they called a real OCD campaign, which was really cool. It was people showing what real OCD looks like, because it's definitely not arranging your cookies in that beautiful way. Like,
no,
right? Like, that's not it. But if anything, as ridiculous and as angry as I was during that time, it was so ridiculous that I feel like it just gave people an opportunity to be like, that's not it. Like, that's just not it. And I think people took a lot from that.
Yeah. What were, in that awareness week, what were some of the symptoms that people tried to highlight and bring attention to kind of like combat that false narrative?
Yeah, some people were showing themselves struggling to get on an elevator, right? And the anxiety and the intrusive thoughts that they had about it. Some people were talking about changing their child's diaper and the intrusive thoughts that they had just to change their child's diaper. People were talking about dating and how OCD can show up in dating, in religion and prayer. So there were, I mean, it really covered. There are so many different subtypes, but people were sort of relationships. People were talking about how OCD has attacked their relationships, their sexuality, their sexual expression, their ability to chop an apple, right? Because some people have harm obsessions. So it's like, I can't even cut my kid's apple. I'm so afraid to use a knife. So I feel like it was really cool to see the backlash. If there wasn't a backlash, I would be like, boo, this is not good. But the backlash was awesome. Like, it was so good.
Yeah. Can we, for the people that maybe aren't as super aware of what OCD is, can you go over some of just like the main types of OCD, right? Everyone knows about, like we talked about, the hand washing, the more physical examples that are in the movies and things like that. But what are the other main types and what do they look like?
Sure. So, forgive me, I'll just back up even a little more just so people understand. So generally, in order to have a diagnosis with OCD, you need to have an obsession and a compulsion. And that obsession needs to, despite OCD's whole thing, is it needs to be a obsession that is unwanted.
Yeah.
Creates a significant degree of distress. And isn't in line with their values. It's not what they don't want to be thinking about this. So, and that's what's so important for people to understand as we move into the subtypes is OCD is not the desire and the love to have these thoughts and these ways of doing things. So yes, you need to have an obsession. Yes, you need to have a compulsion. It usually takes up a minimum of an hour a day. And then that obsession could target literally any area of your life. So you could have relationship OCD, the fear that you don't have the right way to love somebody. You might have just right obsessions, which is when things don't feel right. Like, so it might be a moving target. Today, let's say this hanging here, that feels fine. But then there'll be another day where it doesn't feel right. And I have to kind of move it a little or, until it feels right. And that's the compulsion. The moving of it is the compulsion. It might target your religion or your spirituality, where you feel like you have to pray a certain way, or you need to do these repetitive neutralizing behaviors. It might show up as sexual obsessions. an example might be, let's say, if you are heterosexual, you might have the intrusive, repetitive, unwanted, distressing thought that, what if you're not a heterosexual? Maybe you're gay. If you're gay, you might have the intrusive thought of, maybe I'm heterosexual. How would I know? How would I get certainty on that? So, I mean, I could go on and on. There are so many different ways in which this shows up. Harm OCD is another huge one. Let's say you're, again, chopping apples with your kid. It's summer. You're ready to go to the pool. You're cutting up watermelon and all the fruits. And all of a sudden you have an intrusive thought. What if I use this knife to stab my child? Again, unwanted, repetitive, distressing. And then you immediately, of course, because you love your child, you drop your knife and you're like, I never want to touch a knife again. The avoidance of that knife is actually the compulsion. So it's very nuanced, to use your title, and it's very specific to different people. I've never seen an OCD case that's identical.
And what is the line, sort of, because I feel like on TikTok these days, right, everyone says that they have intrusive thoughts. Like, where is the line? I guess I'm asking two questions, right? You can have an intrusive thought or have intrusive thoughts and not have OCD. And then you can also have like not intrusive thoughts, but think that they're intrusive thoughts. So maybe let's start with, what is the difference? Like, what is an actual intrusive thought compared to the people on TikTok who are like, just me having an impulsive thought of, going to McDonald's, right? Which is like not intrusive. It's like impulsive. Yeah, sorry, Sam.
Sorry. No, you're right. I think an example that I saw on TikTok is people have been talking about, and maybe this speaks to my FYP more than anything, but people have been on cruise ships and saying, like, standing on the balcony, they're like, oh, like, I have the intrusive thought to like jump in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like that type of, same thing with the example Amanda brought up. I feel like those types of examples are what cause people so much anxiety around the idea of intrusive thoughts. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but that was just the example that I've seen.
So it's a great example. Let me give you another example which might resonate for folks with and without OCD. Is I used to have a client who had really bad harm obsessions about children. And she kept this a secret to everyone, including her husband. She was so terrified to tell anyone. She was in the medical field. Of course, a lot of people get reported for this kind of stuff when they don't understand it. This is why it's so important that we understand it. So she would have an intrusive thought the minute she saw a kid, and it really would be whatever is in the area. So if she was with a kid and there was a shovel, her brain would create an intrusive thought that she was going to like cut that kid's foot off or whatever. And this is so distressing, right? She's just like, they just don't stop. They come no matter where I am. The minute I see a kid, if there's a car and a kid, I have a dream that I'm going to run the car into that kid. Or if I have my water bottle in my hand, I have the thought I'm going to hit them over the head with the water bottle. Like, it's nonstop and it's creative, right? It's really like very creative. And that was her experience. Once she was at the beach with her husband, and her husband looked at her and like a bit shocked, and he goes, there was like this plastic bag rolling across the sand. Someone had brought their lunch and left it there. And he kind of judged himself. And then he was like, oh my God, I just had a thought that I put that plastic bag over that kid's head. And she was like, oh, you have no idea. You know what I mean?
Wow.
But I think that's the difference, right? Between someone with OCD and someone without, is we all have them.
Right.
We all have had them. I've had them with my kids and so forth. But where it becomes OCD, there's sort of this line that it gets crossed where it's, like I said, it's repetitive. They don't stop. Right?
Yeah.
And your experience, if you don't have OCD, is a little bit like, oh God, that's weird. Oh goodness, that would be terrible. For someone with OCD, it's like, my life is ending. Like, this is so bad. This is so intolerable. I feel so dysregulated. I cannot go back to focusing on enjoying this beach. This is all I think about now. And we do know, based on the brain, that there is sort of the brakes of the brain. There's a weak brake system. So your brain just keeps throwing these thoughts out. So I think for people on TikTok is, they might be having intrusive thoughts. They might be scary, but the difference is the folks with OCD, it's brutal. It's, again, over an hour a day, and that they cannot withhold the urge to engage in compulsive behaviors to reduce or remove them. Again, for folks who are like, oh, I'm on the cruise and I had the thought of jumping off, my guess is they went about their day, right? And they were like, that was a bummer. I didn't enjoy that. But they kind of went to the bar or they went to the pool or whatever. The folks with OCD will usually engage in a combination of different compulsions because they do not want to have this thought ever again.
Yeah.
I hope that sort of
No, that makes so much sense. And I'm really glad you emphasized the impact that it has on daily functioning, because I think that's the element that's missing from so much of the self-diagnosis, right? Like, we each individually have symptoms of almost anything, right? It's why in grad school they tell us, like, don't read the DSM, or you're going to be like, I'm the most mentally ill person that's ever lived.
Yes.
The key distinction, this is what I tell my clients as well, is that it has to be daily, pervasive. It impacts your ability to live your life the way you want to, and not just momentarily, like we're talking about all day.
Right.
For extended periods of time.
Yeah. And it causes impaired functioning.
Yes.
Right. Again, it's got to be to the point where there's a terror in it, and we know OCD to be what we call the uncertain disorder, right? So some people will like use that the story I told you. He was like, "Oh my gosh, that was weird. I would never do that."
Yeah.
Right. Whereas the person with OCD goes, "Oh my gosh, what if I want to do that? What if I do it?" And then it becomes this nagging, painful uncertainty that does not leave them alone.
So in terms of recovery, right, I'm like very familiar with, exposure and response prevention and some of the ways that people work through it, and sort of the idea of, right, the more you perform those compulsions, whether they're mental or actual physical compulsions, the stronger those thoughts get. But in terms of recovery, let's say someone's gone through that and you would say that, they're doing well. And I'm sure this is a huge wide range, so maybe this isn't even worth me asking. But how would someone who is like sort of recovered from OCD be different from someone who just has like the random intrusive thoughts, like I'm going to jump off a cruise ship? Like,
yes,
I would imagine that they can't ever quite get back to our normal the example of the husband's normal reaction about the bag, but what does it look like?
There's a range, actually. So recovery can look very different. So this is where I get a little snarky, because there are all these people on social media and just marketing cures, right? Like, you'll never have an intrusive thought ever again. And I'm like, oh, prove it. Like, show me how, and I will literally like put some money into your business and we will be rich together, right? That, because there is no one way to be recovered. It is very much on a spectrum. So I'll give you some examples. There are some folks who I have treated who do go through a treatment and their thoughts don't bother them anymore. They barely ever have these intrusive thoughts. And if they do, they're teeny tiny little blips, and they can act like someone who doesn't have OCD, or the neurochemistry of someone who doesn't have OCD. On the other end of the spectrum, there are folks who are in full recovery. They still have intrusive thoughts, right? They don't like them, but when they show up, they do absolutely nothing about them. And they have learnt skills and strategies on how to return back to what they value, and they're back to their full level of functioning. And then there are folks who are between those two spectrums. Both are legitimate examples of a great recovery. Of course, we want more of the first example. And I would say people tend to be more in the middle, right? They might have, the thoughts might be less loud, they might be less frequent, and they mightn't have that full body nervous system response. And they're able to disengage by not engaging in compulsions. That's sort of what I would see commonly. But again, I want to really stress that's still a really good life. Like that's a really empowered, functional, not you're not debilitated life. But I always say to clients, like, recovery is not the absence of intrusive thoughts. It's really your ability to tolerate them and ride them and still live according to your values.
I love that. I love that. What is the line between anxiety and OCD? Because I think that's right. Like, and maybe we can get into like mental compulsions, because I know rumination, right, is a pretty big mental compulsion that really sits in between anxiety and OCD. How do you see their relationship together?
Right. So the jury is out on this one. And I think it depends on how you want to conceptualize it. So some folks conceptualize generalized anxiety and OCD as exactly the same condition.
Interesting.
Right? Because they say that generalized anxiety has an intrusive nature of an unwanted thought that bothers them, that causes them distress, that happens for more than an hour. And they engage in mental rumination or avoidance, or sometimes reassurance seeking compulsions to reduce or remove that uncertainty. So some folks believe that they're pretty much the same beast. Under
what do you think?
Well, under the diagnosis, I understand generalized anxiety to be more about general daily events and stresses, like finances, my job, my children, my health, and things like that. And so for me, I believe in the two different disorders, right? I believe I classify some people with generalized anxiety and some with OCD, but I do see some clients come so far to the line where you have to go, oh wow, like the compulsions seem to be more repetitive. And where that line is with OCD, people will seek reassurance or do compulsions even though they've done that exact behavior before. They've been given reassurance, like they've been given a clear, let's sort of use health anxiety as an example. Like you've gone to the doctor and the doctor says it's not cancer.
Yeah.
Right? Someone with health anxiety would be like, but what if the doctor's wrong? And then
you don't know
back, right?
Yeah.
What if I didn't explain this extra symptom? With OCD, it's similar, right? Like the doubting component comes back in and you've got to keep doing that same compulsion. That's more in the OCD land than it is the generalized anxiety. But again, some people come right up to that line, and you're a consultation away from trying to figure out which is which. The good news is the treatment is very much the same. So for me, I don't spend a lot of time going back and forth over the diagnosis. It's more about where are they stuck? What are they not willing to tolerate? How can we get them back to that value-based life while they tolerate the distress or the anxiety or the uncertainty? So for me, that's more the focus.
Well, I really, really appreciate that insight, because I think even in my own personal practice with my clients and my clinical work, I don't get so wrapped around the axle around what is such and such thing called, right? And even with them, they'll come to me and say, I think I have this, or I think I have this. And we'll kind of even explore like, well, what would having the name change for you?
Yeah.
Like what would that even mean? Like if we can just say we're experiencing these symptoms because we also know we're going through an extremely stressful period of life. Right. And we're starting to, as we look back and be reflective, we can notice that this rumination, these compulsions tend to come up when I'm experiencing significant stress. That's the fact. Right. And so to instead focus on how do we live with this? How do we cope with it? How do we make peace with the fact that we have this tendency to respond to stress or day-to-day life in this way? And I think a lot of people right now, with kind of this surge in self-diagnosis, they're so obsessed with the idea of the identity component that I think these diagnoses can give. And there's a conversation to be had about that. Absolutely. Yet at the end of the day, it's like, well, okay, so now what do we do about it? Like,
Yeah.
we have these symptoms. So how do we help you, exactly as you said, like live a value-based life?
Right. And a lot of folks have both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially now, like how so many people are having generalized anxiety. It's scary out there. It's hard. Right. So a lot of folks have both, and they will even say, I can feel a difference between the two, right? Like one OCD is very gripped and very like, you have to do this, and the voice is meaner and more panicked, whereas generalized anxiety is more, there's additional like other emotions that might be going along with it. I mean, that's true for OCD too, I should say, but often there's both.
Yeah. I mean, I can especially think about if you talked about relationship OCD or things like that in the reassurance seeking, right? Like I can absolutely see how those could be confused or be both, or maybe start as anxiety and then, become OCD or something like that. So I think that, makes so much sense. I was going to say something else and now I don't remember. Sam, if you have anything, you can.
It's perfect. My dog just started barking. I can hear her.
Perfect break.
That was meant to be.
Well, we could go into tell us what a mental compulsion is, because even I think like when I talk to clients about rumination and stuff, it's a very abstract concept to explain to people.
Yeah. It's hard. I'm so glad you said it's complex, because sometimes
I
I'm
always
like, maybe
feel
I'm
like
just
the
not
dumbest clinician when I'm trying to explain it to people. So maybe Kimberly, you can explain it better for people.
Well, and let's first address that rumination shows up in many, if not all, mental conditions. Right?
That's a good point.
You could have an eating disorder and ruminate about calories.
Yeah.
You could have depression and ruminate about how your life is not worth living. So rumination is ultimately just, a cycle, a loop of some behavior.
Yeah.
In the realm of OCD, there are specific mental compulsions that people do that are probably apparent in other conditions as well. But an example might be compulsive counting. So some people with OCD are mental So before I go there, let me just give you a couple of examples. So you might have compulsive counting. You might have compulsive neutralization, where you are thinking about a positive thought to undo the negative thought, right? You might have mental hoarding, which is where you're taking like a mental photograph or a Polaroid of the situation so you can remember it, so that you don't have uncertainty about what happened. An example is some people don't check the stove. They mentally hoard, which is like they take a photo of the stove in their head, not actually, but in their head.
Yeah.
And they remember seeing it at, how it's like faced up way. It's not like a little to the left or a little to the right. It's faced up. So they're remembering that so that they're not uncertain about it later. So there are many different, I would say between 10 and 15 different ways in which we could do a mental compulsion. Rumination is that more just going over something over and over again, but there are many different ways in which we could do that. And each condition has different ways in which they do it. So each subtype, an example would be like, let's say, relationship OCD. You might mentally check for feelings of love towards your partner. You might mentally check, like for sexual obsessions, you might mentally check for arousal. Am I aroused or not by this thing or this person? Right? Another one is mentally praying. So you might mentally pray a certain sequence of things the right way to absolve you of a negative thought or a blasphemous thought you've had if you've had religious obsessions. So there is so many different ways again for OCD, where the compulsions become very complex but very ritualized. Whereas with general anxiety, it's just worry.
Mm-hmm.
Like worry, like, you know, like going
Like a
into
nameless,
all
a
the
nameless
possible
worry.
scenarios, and like, and people do that with OCD, they do it with depression, they do that with eating disorders, many different conditions,
Mm-hmm.
but OCD has these very specific mental compulsions.
Okay, that's really helpful. So someone who, or how do you tell people to not, right? Like the whole point of, right, breaking the cycle in, right, exposure and response prevention or CBT and things like that is to resist doing
Yes.
the compulsion. And I find it really challenging to explain to clients how to not ruminate when people don't feel as though they're doing anything. People
Yes.
feel as though it's just happening to them.
Yes. It's a great question. So number one is, and I'm a CBT therapist, so this is sort of my modality's way of doing it. So that, you know, there are different ways, but when I'm working with a client or any of our staff are working with client, we first want to build some awareness that they're doing it, because it's hard to differentiate between mental rumination and just thinking.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I take a walk, I'm thinking the whole time. And we could classify that as rumination, maybe because I love to think about work when I'm walking in the morning. And we could say, but you thought about work yesterday, so you're ruminating. Well, no, right? I'm not doing it from a place of anxiety or uncertainty. I'm sort of doing it more in a problem solving way. So that's important to know. So first I will actually give them a log to log when they catch themselves ruminating, and we will give, or doing a compulsion, mental compulsion, and we'll have specific understanding of what that looks like. And usually it's, are you thinking about your specific obsession?
Yeah.
I just want you to log anytime you're thinking about that obsession. And we want to then look for, are there specific times in the day or places or things that trigger that? And that is going to be a really important, you know, piece of understanding. Once they have a better awareness, then I'm going to do a ton of psychoeducation about mindfulness skills so that they can sort of strengthen the muscle. And I show them my muscle. Like, we have very weak mindfulness skills. Being present is a weak muscle. And so we're going to strengthen that by practicing coming back to the present. I usually will draw a picture. I actually did this on social media. I'll say like, okay, so here is your day. You're going to like follow, if for those people who are watching, we're following my finger. This is thinking, 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 thinking. And then mental compulsions is over here. And it's like, like this. And I'll say, once you catch yourself off the line of being present, you just note that I'm thinking and you come back to the present. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? And then your brain is going to go back away and be thinking about things again. That's what our brain is meant to do. And you're going to practice coming back to the present. And let's say, and I'll say to clients, let's actually goal for you doing this about 100 times a day minimum. Right? Actually, you're probably going to be more like 1,000 times a day if you have this condition, but let's shoot for between 10 and 100. And we are going to celebrate you every single time, because this is hard work, right? That even if you can come to the present one time today, I'm celebrating you because you are strengthening a muscle. That's the response prevention part of ERP. If they're really struggling with that, we may encourage them to do a flooding behavior, which is called maybe, maybe nots, which is, if your fear is, give me a fear, any fear you have.
Snakes.
Okay. So let's say you're out and you're taking a hike and you're doing a value-based behavior, but you cannot stop this intrusive thought about snakes. You're going to practice that response prevention of staying present and just looking at the trees and the sky and the ground. You're going to have some awareness. Like, and I'm not going to tell you to like look up and completely trip over your feet. So we're going to do that. And then we might even say you're going to engage in flooding behavior. So it might be, maybe I see a snake, maybe I don't. Maybe I see a snake, maybe I don't. And that will replace the mental compulsion. And it's encouraging them to be uncertain. If their obsessions is really strong, I'm going to have you sing a song to the happy birthday song to replace it. So we're going to sing that you're going to see a snake and the snake's whatever, like, and you're going to sing it to the sound of happy birthday, and you're going to make it out to be a joke. So there are different ways in which we can practice this. There's more strategy to it than that, but ultimately it's repetition.
I appreciate so much that you just used the numbers 100 and 1,000 in a 24-hour period, because I think so much of the content right now, and Amanda and I harp upon this forever about coaches, coaching coaches, right? Like this, people that are with the best of intentions talking about these things, talking about how to cope with these things. You mentioned earlier that it sends you over the edge when people are like, never experience this again. I think I've worked with people that trip up so much on how often they have to do this corrective work.
Yes.
And that they feel like such a failure, and they feel so much shame, because I think these are symptoms that carry so much internalized shame around them, that they think, well, I should be able to just be mindful once and it should be gone.
No.
Right? Like there's this pressure of like, well, it should become easier and it should eventually just go away.
Yeah.
And I think so much of this work is just learning how to make peace with your mind, like your brain as a whole. And I'm not even trying to do like a woo-woo philosophical thing here. I think it really is making peace with the fact that you will have thoughts all day, every day. It's one of the crazy things about being a sentient being. Like, it's going to happen. And I think there's so much pressure around still experiencing these things even while doing the work.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people feel like they've failed because it's not happening less.
Well, and let me also share a different perspective on this that is in line with what you're saying. Is I have cptschool.com, which is where we sell our courses. I've taken a lot of business courses and a lot of marketing courses, right? And I have had a lot of business coaches. I've hired a lot of marketing professionals who are top-notch people, and they push me so hard to say, tell them you're going to cure them.
Yep.
Tell them this is going to be easy. They want an easy solution, and you're going to get sales if you can give them an easy. So as you're creating this landing page, let me rewrite this for you.
Yeah.
Because my model is like, you have a mental health condition, and this is going to take some time, but it's doable, and we're going to do it with compassion. And they're like, that is too many words. Tell them it's going to be easy. And I'm like, I would be lying to them if that were the case. One of the most common, hilarious, best, effective games that we play in therapy is what I call hundreds. Hundreds is a game where clients will collect 100 points, kind of like Mario Kart or any of those kind of games, like a video game. You've got to collect 100 points to advance to the next level. And I'll say to clients, the only way to make your brain, we've got a neuroplastic brain, to connect the brain parts that aren't doing a great job of connecting, is to do this on repeat. That is actually where we create new neural pathways in our brain. The other piece of this that I get really annoyed with, and I'm so glad you brought that up, Sam, is the physiology and the neurophysiology of a brain is that your people with anxiety and OCD actually have a brake system that's very weak. So there's nothing stopping the brain from bringing these thoughts repetitive. You're not having, if you have OCD and you're listening to this, you don't have these intrusive thoughts because you want them.
Right.
Or because you're a bad person. Your brain literally cannot pump the brakes on these thoughts. So to say you're going to do it once and fix it would be like me saying you're going to, eat less sugar once and not be a diabetic anymore. It's just not how the physiology of the body works.
Yeah. I think that's so important. I think it's just so interesting too, because I remember when I don't have OCD, but I definitely have anxiety and have like flirted on the edge of it, I think, before. And I I wanted to ask you too about like magical thinking, because I think that's another one that sort of encapsulates both. And I, growing up, was so like obsessed with being perfect that I kind of would let that infiltrate into my thoughts. And I would get very upset and rigid and think that if I thought something negative, it meant I was a bad person. And then it would kind of get, worse and worse because I would get more rigid about it. And it wasn't until learning mindfulness tools, which I learned in yoga, that I was able to like have that visceral experience of I'm not my thoughts, and that like completely changed my life. But it is such an abstract concept to tell. So like I had been told you're not your thoughts probably like thousands of times, but it wasn't until that I kind of had that experience of actually being present that I was able to fully kind of make that connection.
Yeah, I agree. It's that's a part of the psychoeducation of treatment. It's such a huge piece. We do a thorough psychoeducation part of treatment where we actually help people to understand and have a better relationship with their thoughts and also with their anxiety. And so we will often say thoughts aren't facts. They're thoughts.
Yeah.
Right. But in addition, feelings aren't facts. When you have anxiety, your brain literally is sending the message that doom is approaching. Bad things are about to happen. And so it's kind of hard to avoid and ignore that. It's hard to just dismiss that because you feel irresponsible. You feel like especially if it's about something you love, right? And anxiety and OCD always attacks what you value the most. And so it does feel very it's very scary to not pay attention and treat it like it's really important. But that is a part of the process.
I love that you mentioned that, because I think Sam and I talk about this a lot of kind of, on the age of way too much information and all of us being like flooded and overwhelmed and in a constant state of anxiety. I really struggle sometimes to not check what's going on.
Yes.
Because I have a lot of fear that I will miss something and that something is important and I like won't be aware of it, and somehow it will like directly more impact me if I don't exactly know what's going on. So I think that's such a good point about just we want to like we're checking to try to make ourselves feel better and be sure that everything's okay. But the more you do that, the worse it gets.
Yes. And the message we have to really explore gently is if you have, and this is a part of breaking the cycle, is if you have a fear or an obsession, it feels real. But if you treat it like it's real, you reinforce it for tomorrow. And that's a hard cookie to chew on. Like that's no fun to acknowledge, but it is actually the way it works. So if you have something that feels real, if you do respond in that way, you're reinforcing it. So the only job we have is to practice not taking things as real, even though they feel like they are.
Well, and I think going back to what all of your incredible business coaches have told you and have also told Amanda and I mean, truly, if we like just gave up our ethics, we would all be having a wedding the likes of Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez. You know what I'm saying? Like, what's hard is I think so many of these skills are technically easy. They're technically straightforward. When we're talking about telling somebody like practice awareness, bring yourself back into your body, accept that this is just a day-to-day occurrence, right? On the surface, I think what trips people up is they hear those three things and they're like, there's no way it's that straightforward. But then they also expect it to be quick.
Yes.
Because the steps are simple, they expect that it's going to be quick. But then also I found with some people that I've worked with over the years that because it feels so complex up here, when you give them such straightforward directives of how to approach it, they almost feel like we aren't understanding it professionally.
Yes.
Because they're like, but it is so messy. It is so oppressive. It is so overwhelming. There's no way it's as quote unquote simple as me like bringing myself back to the present moment and just flexing this muscle.
Yes.
And so I feel like we occupy both spaces at the same time, where it's like, actually, the skills I'm going to give you are very straightforward and simple to remember and stay focused on. And this is going to take effort. It's going to take a lot of awareness and practice and intention to apply it. And I think that's what confuses business coaches about what we do. Because they're like, but it's simple. And we're like, yes, and it's hard.
Well, and I think you put the words perfectly, which is it is simple, but it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to put on your sales page that it's simple and easy.
Simple and easy, yeah.
Right? But it is simple, but it's not easy. And the main piece that as a final, like one of the big pieces of the psychoeducation is this is going to be a pretty standard treatment.
Yeah.
But the thing that will determine success is often willingness to be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Right? And so back when I was first trained in these modalities, we used to, as we did exposures and we would go and face our fear, the client's fears, we used to do a check-in under their SUD scale. For those of you who don't know, it's a subjective units of distress. Like, how uncomfortable are you? And they would go, oh, well, I'm like doing this scary thing. Let's say the fear was, chopping apples. Let's go back. And they'll go, well, it's kind of like an 8 out of 10. And we'd be like, okay, all right, good. Okay, now what are you at? Oh, I'm at a 7. Oh, great. Look at us go. We're doing so great. Like that would be how we would check in. We have now learned that that is actually reinforcing too much attention on the anxiety.
Mm.
And now instead we say, out of 10, how willing are you to be uncomfortable?
Oh, I love that.
Right. And by that, you're reframing the exposure, not to like, ooh, are we getting rid of it or is it coming like that? Instead, we're having a perspective of how willing are you to experience this physiological experience or these mental thoughts? And what can we do to increase that? Because I always say with my clients and all of my kind of educational materials, we're looking for an 8, 9, and 10 out of 10 of willingness. And that's the piece that no one wants to hear.
Nope.
But that's how you change your brain. So if you're interested in that.
Yeah. I'm obsessed with that, Kimberly, because I hate the SUD scale. And whenever anyone asks me, then I become super fixated on the number and super fixated on making sure that the number is going down properly.
Yeah, it's not the goal.
To like make sure, like when I've done EMDR and stuff like that, I get really fixated on, well, I haven't come down enough in how uncomfortable I am. So I got to make sure that they can wrap up the session on time. So I have to make sure that I'm down to a 1 or 2 by the end.
No, if a client comes to me, I say this all the time. If a client comes to me after a week and says, Kimberly, you'd be so proud I haven't had one panic attack all week, I'd go, boo.
Yeah.
Right. I'd be like, that's wonderful, but we do not measure your recovery based on whether you had a panic. Yep. I would love, like, if you said to me I had 6 panic attacks, but I wrote each one of them out and I was so kind and I was so willing, I would be like, you are winning, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's go. Look at us. You have made massive progress. And so that's, of course, I'm not going to be like, I hope you suffer. That's not ever my goal. But there is a mindset shift when it comes to anxiety that a big piece of my podcast is to try to help people unlearn what they've been taught about discomfort. Like my thing that I always say is it's a beautiful day to do hard things. Like that's that we have t-shirts with that written on it, because the alternative is like stay calm. You know, what is the saying? Like stay calm and drink coffee or carry on.
Keep calm, carry on.
Yeah, like for me, it's like, no, we do hard things. That's what this is about.
Yeah, I love that. Sam, were you going to say anything?
It's
always funny when we do these interviews because we don't know who's gonna answer, and I tend to sometimes talk to.
Oh no, I stumped them.
No, well, sometimes it's hard too because it's like the guests that we have them on because we see you as like a wealth of knowledge, and so sometimes it's like when you guys share these incredible nuggets, I'm just like, yeah, and then I forget I'm like, oh, this isn't a training, like I'm having a conversation.
Yeah. I had a similar situation. I was recording with two therapists a couple months ago, and I'd said something similar, and they were like, I don't think I can go on. Like, they were literally like, I can't finish this, because I think they were thinking about their own clients, right?
Yeah, because I have I have a list in my head right now of people that I'm like, have I ruined them or am I on the right track? But I think, kind of covering like everything that we've spoken about so far, I love that you also emphasize psychoeducation, because I am a huge, huge advocate that I think for so long in therapy across modalities, that is the element that has been missing from so much treatment. Is I think some clinicians, with good reason at times, are so afraid of feeling like they are telling the client their reality, right? Kind of this like, well, I can't, like, I have to let them come to it on their own. And it's like, well, they can't come to it on their own if they don't even know what they're trying to come to, No. Like we have to give them like a foundation of understanding of what is going on in their brain. And I've found in my work with my clients that when I do that, it eliminates like 50% of the pressure.
Yeah.
Right off the bat, when they understand like, oh, this is not a morality thing. This is not a worth thing. This is not a I messed up thing. This is just as you beautifully put it, my brain is absent of brakes and brake pads right now. And we need to go into the tune-up shop and figure out how we get those installed.
Yeah.
Like I really think that so many of us are doing a disservice when we're not shining a light to our clients of what is really happening and why they are experiencing the things the way that they are. It's not about telling people like, well, it only looks like A, B, C, D, like, and you can't go outside of that. No, it's explaining the neurobiology, what is common for people that struggle with these things, what it looks like day to day, and then asking them like, how does your life fit into those parameters?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I just really appreciate and respect your approach.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Well, it's not mine. I mean, it's
well, the way you do it on a public scale. So
the other thing to think about here is people are coming to us with disorders. So if we just let them come to their own decisions, OCD, let's use an example, is very, very convincing and can actually make people lose insight. Yeah. I could have a client who's incredibly insightful, but in the area of their OCD, they've got very little, if any. And so a lot of our work is, it's actually got a little bit of a narrative component to it, which is, we'll inquire, like, tell me what OCD says, like making it a third person. Like there's you and there's me, and then there's OCD. Tell me about what OCD tricks you into believing. And that can be an important component. It's psychoeducation, but it's also just allowing them to see it for what it is, so that they can sort of diffuse from it a little, to sort of use like more of an ACT term of diffuse from the story and the narrative, and be able to observe, oh, OCD is telling me that if I don't do this thing, well, I'm responsible for my child's death or whatever it might be. The other thing to know about OCD as an OCD therapist is like there's literally nothing we don't talk about. Like we have to talk about the most grueling, graphic sexual harm. Like when I'm employing staff, we have very big conversations about like, you have to be 100% okay to talk about and in detail the things that are most people would wince at, and you need to do it without wincing.
Yeah.
How did you, Kimberly, become interested in this? Do you have any connection to OCD?
It's an interesting question. I wanted to treat panic disorder. And I wanted, when I came out of my master's degree, I was looking for anyone who would treat teach me how to treat panic. And the only place that would ever give me any kind of experience was at an OCD center. And I immediately loved it. Now, I personally had an eating disorder. But as soon as I met people with OCD, I was like, these are my people.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't ever feel super like the eating disorder people were my people.
Yeah.
But OCD people were my people, because I felt like my eating disorder had this obsessive compulsive cycle. I would have the fear of gaining weight. Then I would calculate steps and calories and do compulsive exercise to reduce that. It was just felt that way. And similar to you, Amanda, I've always sort of had some tendencies. Only recently did I talk publicly about I kind of had this in 2022 or 3. I had just recently actually an explosion of PTSD out of nowhere. Literally, as a clinician, I've been in therapy my whole life. Like I've done all of it. And I had an explosion of PTSD, and it very quickly escalated into OCD. And thankfully, I could catch it right away, and got treated for it right away. So it was an interesting thing for me to think of myself like before OCD, after OCD. Kind of like, like before Christ, after Christ kind of thing. Like it felt like there was a life before and there was a life after. So it was a ride, and it was so good because it did feel different to an eating disorder. And as soon as it happened, I was like, oh, this is what this is.
Well, and I imagine it like completely shifted the relationship that you had with your clients as well. Not even necessarily like in how you did or didn't do your work, but I think the empathetic factor there shoots through the roof.
It was funny because I didn't tell anybody as I was going. I try for myself to always have gone through it before I publicly share.
Totally.
Absolutely.
But there were times when my clients would be like crying, and they'd be like, this is just so hard. And I'd be like, it is really hard.
It's really hard.
And I'd be like, yes, it's very, very hard. And I'd be like, oh my God, I'm in this with you, but I can't tell you I'm in this with you.
And in your head, you're like, in 6 months when I'm in a better place, maybe I'll self-disclose.
Yes. Or there'll be a situation where I just come out of therapy with my OCD therapist and PTSD therapist, and she'd have just had told me, even though I know these things, I need to be reminded. And then I would be like, now might be a time where we really, let's do it together. Let's practice being uncertain. And they're thinking, wow, she's so collaborative. And I'm thinking, I need this help.
I love that. Yeah, I had like when I had my daughter, I had a big bout of, which is very common. I know women who have kids, like often they I think it's like biological, right? They experience a lot more intrusive thoughts right afterwards. And it's interesting because I remember telling my husband, and I am notoriously not the most, I don't know, careful person. I'm sort of someone who's like, it'll all work out and it'll be fine. And it's sort of like my way of coping with like having anxiety, I think. And my husband was like, well, maybe it's good that you're like really worried about dropping our baby. Maybe it's good that you're very aware. And he is very like someone who's like kind of borderline hypervigilant, like very aware of his surroundings at all times. Like when we're walking or whatever, he like sees everything, where I'm just like, la da 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 da. So yeah, I think that's just interesting too. Do you have much experience with working with like moms, and where does it become just like normal postpartum intrusive thoughts, and where does it, I guess, become OCD? I guess we already sort of answered this, of it's how long it takes, the level of debilitating it is.
Yeah, so there is postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. I think you're very, very lucky to have a child and not have postpartum anxiety, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
I agree.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's because it's an incredibly anxious, stressful, so much responsibility, especially if you've already struggled with some hyper responsibility and perfectionism. Like that's hard, right? I definitely had postpartum anxiety. Postpartum OCD is actually a subtype of OCD, one we didn't cover before. I apologize.
Oh, you're fine.
Where people become, again, debilitated by the hyper responsibility of, will I drop my baby? Will I harm my baby? Will I sexually do something inappropriate to my baby? There could be a crossover with more pedophilia obsessions, which happens for some folks as well. And so it can, a lot of people with like health anxiety by proxy. So they're become fixated on every sniffling nose, every action. I've had moms worry about the development of their child and compulsively check the development of their child. It can show up in, again, OCD attacks the things we value. And when you have a little babe, it comes strong.
Well, it's so hard too, because when you have a child, like there's always this fear and thought of, even like I have these thoughts sometimes, like my daughter's like eye has been like randomly swollen and I think it's just a sty and it's like probably fine. But then you're like, oh my God, what if I don't take her to the doctor in time and it is an infection and then she is blind and it is my fault?
Yeah.
Like that's, and you have to like weigh out, is that really a risk? Am I overreacting? When do I go to the urgent care? As a toddler parent, you're like at urgent care every week. And it's a hard line when you feel like I feel a lot of responsibility that obviously I didn't have before, that feels like, oh, she can grow up and if something's wrong with her, it was my fault. And that's like an intense feeling to have.
For real.
And in the reverse, Amanda, I think as the therapist, I don't have kids. I've when you work with millennial aged women, you are coaching a lot of them through like first time motherhood, being a new mom, having multiple kids, right? And sometimes I've even, when I hear them like having anxiety about their baby or concern about their baby, I even sometimes find myself like checking my initial clinical reaction to be like, well, I'm not being fair. Like this is an adjustment for them. Like I don't want them to feel like I'm attacking them. And I think there's been times where I've kind of held back some of my assessment piece because they are so like hyper fixated on the baby. You're almost afraid to upset them more by questioning the anxiety. And because they will become so defensive about it because they're like, well, it's my baby. Like, why wouldn't I worry? Why wouldn't I be like perseverative on making sure that everything is perfect and that they never cry and they're never worried and they are held all the time? And then you start to be like, well,
and it's hard because of social media, right?
Exactly.
Like you scroll on social media and literally people are like, you should never put your child in daycare. They will, like, daycare is horrible. They're, you don't know what's going on there. And then you scroll through someone else and they're like, you're ruining your child by being so worried and you're holding them too much. You're not holding them enough. Sleep trained.
Can you tell this is something that we've spoken about a lot, Kimberly?
I'm just over here in absolute like, yes, girls go off because
it's hard.
Because it is so hard. It is so hard. Again, going back to that insight piece, is sometimes one question that we do ask is like, is there someone you truly trust? And how are they showing up? And that can sometimes be, instead of it being me suggesting, because I legally also don't want to be responsible for saying, don't take your kids to the doctor.
They're fine. Yeah, no.
Right.
No.
So it's often having conversations around, or a lot of the compassion focused work that we do is having them check in with like, what would your compassionate self do in this situation? If you weren't consulting with shame and fear, how would you show up? And that can sometimes really be eye-opening for them. If I wasn't coming from a fearful place, but I was coming from this compassionate, wise place, it mightn't be that they'd be completely fine, but there might be a small little pivot that they would take. And so my goal with them is, if you could just get to a place where you're coming from your wisest self.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great goal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I also think I've found too in this realm, because I think there's a lot of people that haven't spent, if we're going to keep like the kid route, I think there's a lot of people who haven't spent a significant amount of time around babies,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they haven't had a lot of
Mhm.
exposure to the reality of babies. They just
Mhm.
haven't, either they're the first in their friend group, or they came from smaller families, or they didn't have huge communities when they were growing up, right? And so because I've had a couple of clients who've been really upset when their babies cry.
Mm-hmm.
Like they become really stressed and anxious. And I've even asked, like, have you ever like seen someone distressed?
Yeah.
Because I think witnessing that the first time is so jarring. To see this little thing that you all of a sudden out of nowhere love more than anything in the world, more than you could have ever loved anything before. And then they're like losing their mind.
Yeah.
And you don't know how to help them. And I've even asked them then, like, is this a new experience for you?
Mm-hmm.
And to have compassion for the fact that this is such like a huge learning curve, and that you don't have to know how to do it right, and you don't have to know how to do it perfectly. But I think we're up against all of the hormonal changes. And then if we have developed this specific postpartum depression, anxiety, or OCD, like, I think it's a whirlwind. And
Mhm.
I think as clinicians, for the three of us, you have so much compassion for them. And I'm glad you brought up that idea of tapping into the compassion piece, because I think it's so easy to forget that that's a voice that we're allowed to listen to,
Yeah.
in like through all of the noise that our anxiety is trying to communicate to us, or our OCD is trying to communicate to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a huge piece of the work.
Mhm.
And again, it often goes back to how willing are you to tolerate your own emotion, guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Often it's not even anxiety that my clients are managing, it's guilt, right? So,
Yeah.
okay, what's your
Yeah.
relationship with guilt? When you have it, do you squash it? Do you
Mm-hmm.
appease people and go into people pleasing and perfectionism, or can you ride waves of guilt as well?
Mhm.
Yeah. Ooh, I love that. What would you say? Because I'm glad you brought up like emotions. And I think one thing that people get very stuck on is like, what is the difference between processing my emotions, allowing myself to feel this way, learning to tolerate the discomfort, right, of the guilt, let's say, and ruminating?
Well, the way I think of guilt, I actually have a
Mm-hmm.
whole podcast episode on this. This is my personal way of
Yeah.
understanding guilt.
Mhm.
Guilt is really a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Guilt is really there to do a little quick check-in of, do I want to proceed in this way? I always think of guilt like you're driving along this beautiful country road and it's just that little stop sign. So there's no cross, it's not like a T intersection. It's just a stop sign in the middle of nowhere that says, pause for a second, check in. Do you want to proceed in this way? Right? So that's all it is. It's just it's a little bit of a values check-in. Just like, checking to make sure you've got enough gas in your tank or whatever. So really guilt is like, okay, if I feel guilt, am I acting according to my values? If you are acting according to your values, proceed and allow the guilt to be there. You don't need to process anything because it's probably a false alarm, right? It's probably societal. It's probably learned from childhood, right? That you should or shouldn't do things, and we picked all that stuff up. But if you are acting a certain way and you feel guilt and you go, let's say you just yelled at your husband, right? You might check in and be like, no, I'm happy. He needed to be yelled at. I'm fine with it, right? Right? And you proceed, right?
Yeah.
Don't ruminate on whether you did it. You did it. It's done. Act accordingly. If you yelled at your husband and you're like, I don't like that. That's not how I want to be. You would do what is necessary to a certain period of time to check in and be like, what would I do different? How could I change? But it's not to punish. Guilt is, if there's a difference between guilt and self-punishment,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mhm.
So we're not doing any self-punishment. You just check in whether you want to do that. You may need to like call your therapist or do whatever you need to make amends or whatever. But then you proceed. We don't hang out at that stop sign for very long. You just have to be willing to feel the feelings you have about the fact that you did a human thing.
Mm-hmm.
Humans yell at husbands, even if they don't want to, right? Humans make mistakes. We act in ways that we don't want. Processing guilt, I always think, is more actual just self-punishment.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
You can stop and go, okay, that didn't work for me. This is how I would do it differently. But that's a short conversation you have with yourself. If you find that you keep coming up against the same problem, by all means, reach out to somebody, get help with the problem. But I strongly discourage people from engaging in self-punishment because all that does is lead you to low self-esteem, higher risk of a depression, higher rates of, general dysfunction in your mental health.
Yeah.
What about other emotions? Like, let's say someone's dealing with grief. What would be the difference between processing their grief, in your opinion, and ruminating or wallowing is something that I hear that people get confused about?
Well, I follow the Kubler-Ross model for grief in that you must go through the stages. And so when I say, let me go back to the guilt thing, is it moving on doesn't mean you won't feel guilt. It means you have to take guilt with you. Right.
I love that.
And you have to just not tend to it. Right.
Yep.
We don't give it just because it's there, just like an intrusive thought. Just because it's there doesn't mean we have to treat it like it's all important. Grief is there's going to be stages where you do wallow in it. We don't do grief well in this Western world.
No.
And so I would 100% encourage people to give themselves as much time as they need to grieve.
Yeah.
I think that it's important that you go through the stages of depression and bargaining and anger and all of those very normal stages. However, you will again need to do a little bit of a values check on, am I still acting according to the way I want to? And there's no right way, right? So let's say you're grieving and you can't get out of bed.
Yeah.
You might say, am I acting according to what I need and value? And you might say, yes. I need some more time, even if it's a pet or, you're grieving a job loss or friendship loss. Like maybe you decide, but that's for you to decide, not other people. You get to decide whether, okay, you might check in and be like, no, it's time to get up. I think the kindest thing to myself will be to brush my teeth and to, do the dishes or whatever you can do. But that's going to be, there's no, in my opinion, folks with anxiety really love to be told there's a right and a wrong way.
Yeah.
Amen.
And they hate and I think it sucks when I say you're just going to have to follow your wisest mind on this one, but not your anxious mind. So I don't know. I think everybody's going to have their own way.
Yeah.
What's right for you might be different for other people.
Yeah, I love bringing in values. How I often explain it to people is like it's sort of the difference between, like, I think a lot of times it becomes rumination when you're trying to not, to use your words, bring it with you. Or I kind of say, like, when you're not allowing it to come up, you're rejecting it, you're judging it, you're trying to force it down, you're trying to rationalize it. Versus, right, like thinking about how a lot of times an emotion's peak is only a few minutes and riding that peak. And then I love what you kind of added of like checking back in with your values. And I think so often our like obsession with not feeling a certain emotion causes so much more damage than if we just learn to tolerate the emotion being there.
Yeah. I talk often on the podcast about when we're ruminating, you're just head up, your neck up. And usually we ruminate because we don't want to feel what's neck down.
Yeah.
And so often that's, again, a question of like, again, how willing are you to actually feel this one? and it's fun to play little games with it. Like, okay, where's guilt in your body? Oh, it's right here. And I'll say, okay, are you willing to feel it? No. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Where's the perimeter of it? Are you willing to feel the perimeter of where it's at?
I love that.
That might be very empowering for someone to be like, oh, I don't have to like, because they're like, oh my God, I don't want to feel this feeling.
Yeah.
I'm sick of feeling this feeling. And so you might be creative of like, okay, what about the perimeter? Could you bring some compassion to the perimeter of where it's at? And so I think it depends on the client.
Yeah. Well, this was so awesome, Kimberly. Thank you so, so much for coming and chatting with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. I hope it was helpful.
Oh my gosh, it was so helpful. It was so helpful. Sam, is there anything that I missed that you wanted to add or anything?
No, other than I wish we could like attach some CEUs to this, because that's how helpful it felt for me, even professionally and personally. So thank you. Appreciate you.
Happy to hear it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kimberly. Again, where can people find your work, follow you? I know you also have a workbook.
Yeah,
right?
I do. So you can find me at Your Anxiety Toolkit on Instagram. I have a podcast called Your Anxiety Toolkit. All of our online courses, we do have CEUs for a lot of our courses on cbtschool.com. I have private practice in Calabasas. You can just Google my name, Kimberly Quinlan Calabasas, and it will show up. And I do have a workbook through New Harbinger Publications called the Self-Compassion Workbook for OCD.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll talk to you later.
Yeah, thank you.